I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
One of the things that we've really lost is the unexpected. Because I think you would set off previously, and this was really one of my intentions in doing that trip, you would set off previously and you wouldn't know what you would find there. Like you'd have Lonely Planet maybe, or you'd talk to some people who'd been there and they'd say there would be like this. But it's so different from where we are now, where you can really know down to the kind of street view level exactly what you'll find in a place that you go to. And then you go there and it looks like you expected. Adventure is just has become an incredibly overused word now. People talk about adventure travel and I'm going on an adventure and I'm going on this epic adventure all the time. But I think for me, the word adventure requires an element of the unknown and even potentially an element of the risk. And I think the unknown disappears the more we use technology to control our environment.
That is today's guest, Ben Buckland, sharing a couple of the insights he had from his experience walking through the mountains from France across Switzerland to Austria. But this was no ordinary trek. What made this trek different is that he didn't bring a smartphone or any technology. He was relying solely on hand-drawn maps from people he met along the way to get him through. Now, I discovered Ben's work through the New York Times article he published about this journey, where you can see the hand-drawn maps. It's a beautiful piece of art and writing, and I thought, I need to have Ben on the show to dive deeper and share some of the many lessons he learned along the way that you can apply to your own travels. And that's only the tip of the iceberg for this conversation, because when I was preparing for the show, I learned that Ben is also an internationally award-winning photographer, as well as a senior advisor on torture prevention, whose work has taken him to over 100 countries, to war zones, logging camps, and some of the worst prisons on Earth. And we talk about it all today in this episode right now. We're going to get into it. Buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And we've got Ben Buckland on the show. You can check out his work over at benbuckland.photo. Link up to everything in the show notes. Of course, that amazing New York Times piece where you can see the hand-drawn maps. And, we dive deep on his work in human rights and photography, why he advocates for a trauma-informed approach to storytelling, some of his experiences on the ground, working with police reform in Madagascar, and really his core theme of incremental change leading to progress, and so much more. A couple more things to be on the lookout for. There's a surprising thing I found out during the beginning of this conversation. This wasn't Ben's first attempt to walk from France to Austria without a phone. You'll hear the crazy story behind what happened the first time he tried this trip and some of the lessons there. And stick around on the back end. Ben has a little phrase he says. You might catch it during the interview. This just might be the key to unlocking a satisfying work life for you. Don't forget, we have a newsletter. It's free. ZeroToTravel.com/newsletter. It's an easy one to remember. You can sign up over there. Now, here's my conversation with Ben Buckland. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the other side. Cheers. Ben Buckland, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, Jason. It's really great to be here. Great to meet you.
It's always a treat for me to being based in Norway to talk to other people on this side of the pond because I don't have to battle the time zone thing. I mean, I'm sure you've had plenty of work-related time zone battles over the years, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I was chairing a meeting yesterday with included someone from Costa Rica who was at 4 a.m. for them, and then some Australians for whom it was way too late in the evening. So yeah, constant battle.
That exact scenario when you're on a call like that, where you're spanning like time zones across the world, we kind of take it for granted now, but it's so unique. Like it's only recently, it's a blip on the radar compared to like the history of humanity. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's a scene in Moby Dick that I always love where they talk about the postal system that they used on whaling vessels, which essentially involved any ship leaving Nantucket taking all the mail for any whaling ship. And then every time they would pass another ship in the Pacific or anywhere else, they would yell, "Is Jason aboard?" No, okay. Is Jason aboard? And then eventually like, "Oh yeah, we have a letter for him. It's taken 2 years to get to you." And when you think about that was the kind of the as far as we could get with the global mailing system, not even that long ago compared to now, it is kind of magical.
That's crazy. That was the height of technology at the postal technology at the time. Like, hey,
yeah.
buddy. That sounds very charming until like you think of the practicality of like waiting for a letter from your mother for 2 years or whatever.
Exactly.
I mean, speaking of old school, we're going back in time a little bit, and this is part of what we're going to talk about. And I wanted to talk about this first was, I discovered your New York Times piece when you walked from France to Austria through the Alps. With no phone, and you were just being guided by these hand-drawn maps. And it's so cool because the article is sort of like a piece of art in itself, right? Like you have like these hand-drawn maps, and then you're sort of like kind of summary or synopsis of kind of those points between that you covered. It just brought me back, man. Like, this used to be normal, and now it's a novelty. I feel like we've gone from normal to novelty for a lot of things. Yeah, I just kind of want to hear about the overall experience, because you said in the article, quote, "I wanted to know what it would teach me about how technology and convenience have changed the way we travel." And so I'm wondering, like, what did you take away from that? And we can dig in a little bit more about like some of the stories behind the walk and everything.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad that you like the piece, and the point that you made about it kind of being a kind of piece of art. It was something that I did really intentionally. I bought a really beautiful kind of heavy paper sketchbook and these really nice art pencils that I want so that I could give people something when I was asking them to draw a map that would kind of encourage them to be artistic in that way. And some of them played into that more than others, and people put really loads and loads of time. But I kind of wanted to put people in a mindset of, you should create something beautiful. And I was really happy that some people did. And I think some of the maps are just wonderful bits of illustration and drawing, and really say something beautiful about how people see the world in a way that I really didn't expect. Yeah, and you're right about normal to totally different. I mean, I'm 44 tomorrow, and so I'm old enough to have spent my youth traveling when that was a totally normal thing to do. And I think one of the things that I became really nostalgic for that, because I think one of the things that we've really lost is the unexpected. Because I think you would set off previously, and this was really one of my intentions in doing that trip, you would set off previously and you wouldn't know what you would find there. Like you'd have Lonely Planet maybe, or you'd talk to some people who'd been there and they'd say there would be like this. But it's so different from where we are now, where you can really know down to the kind of street view level exactly what you'll find in a place that you go to. And then you go there and it looks like you expected, and the restaurant is open at this time because you saw it on Google, and this place is beautiful because you saw pictures of it on social media and whatever. And I think that's cool, but I really felt like I was losing something, because I thought, well, if I know what it's going to be like in advance, what's the point of going there? And I really felt like I was losing some kind of aspect of adventure and memorability. And I feel like adventure is just has become an incredibly overused word now. People talk about adventure travel, and I'm going on an adventure, and I'm going on this epic adventure all the time. But I think for me, the word adventure requires an element of the unknown, and even potentially an element of the risk. And I think the unknown disappears the more we use technology to control our environment. And the unexpected does too, because it allows us, if we're never lost, if we can grab an Uber whenever we want, there's the level of unexpected things just reduces and reduces until we have a situation that we can always manage. And I think that's great in many ways. It's made travel, I think, safer. And maybe if you only have a short amount of time to go on a trip, you want it to be perfect. I think there's great things about that. But I really felt like I was losing something and had lost something that I really wanted to try and regain, even if it was in a kind of contrived way by specifically leaving my phone at home.
It's so funny to think about something like this as, like, if somebody was thinking, well, this is like, this is a gimmick or something. This is like a way to write. And like, it's actually not that at all to me. It's actually an intentional way to go on a true adventure in many ways. Like you said, I think about the mindset of, like, when you were talking about the technology, I'm thinking about, that practical example of, okay, you're using, and let's face it, Google Maps has been a great resource. These mapping apps have been wonderful. I mean, I remember I spent a decade plus touring as a touring professional, and we'd have to pull over into the side of the road and, use payphones and just ask people. And that was the way it was, So it's a lot more convenient to get from point A to point B. But that's the point, like the mindset of just getting from point A to point B. And I mean, if you're just doing that sort of, you can't help, that's kind of what your mind is focused on, as opposed to the openness of what even is point A and point B? When you're getting hand-drawn maps, you're not really knowing where you're going to start and where you're going to end up in many ways. So it just erases the point A and point B thing, And then there's sort of the unexpected stuff, as you mentioned. I don't know. I find it fascinating because, you could look at it as inconvenient, right? But what is convenience? Is it just getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible? That is convenient, and that there's a time and place for that. But is the time and place for that on a travel adventure?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes down to just thinking more intentionally about what are our objectives when we go on a trip. What do we actually want to achieve there, or what do we want to get out of it? And I think if your objectives are one thing, then maybe going in one way is the right thing to do. But for me, I really felt like actually maybe my objectives were something different. And a couple of points that you raised that I think are really interesting to pick up on, the point A to point B thing, I think is interesting, because if you are following Google Maps or you're in an Uber, you really can just totally zone out from the world. You don't have to think about, well, where am I? And I really felt like, coming back to your first question about what did I learn from this, one of the things that I really took away from it was the need to really pay attention to the world in a way that I don't think you have to when you're when you know where you are the whole time, when you're controlling your environment. It really forced me to pay attention to the world, and also to be present in the moment, because I didn't know where I was going, so I couldn't just project myself into knowing that I'm going to destination X. I couldn't just imagine myself there. I had to be where I was, because that's the only place that I could be. But just one other thing that I wanted to come back to, because I talked about adventure, and I do think it is important to note that I think we can romanticize adventure. And I think I was reading the comments on my New York Times piece, and someone wrote, and I think quite rightly, that like there's a kind of privilege in doing this. The fact that I'm a white guy, there are risks that I would take doing this that maybe would not be acceptable risk to someone else. And so I think there's a privilege element that I think is important to not shy away from. But there's also, I mean, and I didn't write about this in the piece, but actually doing this walk was actually the second time I tried to do it. Because the year before, I'd set off on exactly the same journey, and on day 2, I broke my leg and I had to hop for 6 hours to get down to a road because I didn't have my phone. And in the end, that was a great adventure, and my leg healed up fine, and I was able to do the trip as I'd intended the following year. But I mean, the convenience is also important from a just safety point of view, that I think we need to keep in mind when we're romanticizing adventure, as I have a tendency to do, and I fully intend to keep on doing trips like this in the future because I love that kind of adventure. And actually, I feel like that weirdly that experience of breaking my leg was actually, I think, overall a really positive experience for me, because I got to learn something really deep about my own physical and emotional limits that I never would have learned otherwise. And I think we should savor those opportunities to learn things, even when at the time they're horrible. And I swore a lot.
We have to hear the story. How did you break the leg? And I mean, 6 hours hopping down through, the mountains on one leg. That's pretty brutal, man. That's seriously intense.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. I mean, it had been raining all night, and so I got up super early in the morning because it was kind of miserable being in my tent. And I started out, and I was just heading down a hill, and it was a really steep slope. And I had the second year I did it with a much lighter backpack, but as a photographer, I'm always thinking, okay, maybe I should bring this lens and that lens and this lens. And so I had a really heavy pack on, and the path was very slippery, and I just slipped at one point and kind of went over an edge, and I heard a really loud crack, and I knew that my hike was over. I didn't actually know that my leg was broken at the time. I just knew that it hurt. And I had 2 walking poles, luckily, and so I was able to just kind of hop my way down the hill incredibly slowly, and with an enormous amount of loud swearing. I mean, in the end, actually, if I'd had a phone, I'm not sure it would have helped that much, because it was pouring with kind of rain and sleet and incredibly cold. And so actually sitting around and waiting to be rescued, I'm not sure would have been a good option anyway. There was no visibility, so there's no way a helicopter could have come anyway. So I think in the end, having a phone, I'm not sure would have helped that much. But yeah, I hopped down the hill, eventually got to a road, and there was a little shelter there, and I stopped there, and I made some tea and tried to warm up a little bit. And then I was just kind of looking at the road and mentally preparing myself for what I knew would be a long way down to the valley. And then a couple of council workers, who turned out to be Kurdish guys, drove past in a van, and they drove me down the hill. And we had this great conversation about Turkish politics. Actually, they weren't big fans of Erdogan, so that was pretty funny at the end. And yeah, and it was in the end it was fine. I spent 6 weeks in a cast, and then a few months after that, kind of recovering, but was then able to do the walk the following year. So, kind of the point I made about it being a positive thing, I feel like the long-term impact is nothing except that I got to have this really profound emotional and physical experience, and therefore I can only see it as a positive, which might be a weird way to see the world, but I've had a particularly big tragedy this year, and I've thought a lot about those kind of experiences, and really come to this idea that days that we remember are days that it's worth being grateful for, whether we remember them for tragedy or for extraordinary, transcendently happy experiences. I think there's days we remember, as opposed to all the other days of our lives that pass by unremarked, are days that we should somehow be grateful for, as hard or as good as they may be. And that was definitely a day I remember.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop. Now, back to the show. I want to circle back to what you mentioned, kind of this, seeing this in a positive light in a little bit. But I did want to ask you a little bit more about this this walk, because in the article you also said, quote, "Our attention is a gift. Reading maps is an act of empathy. They tell us as much about the person who made them as they do about the world." And I wanted you to share a bit more about what you meant by that.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I realized through doing the walk, because one of the first maps, first or second or third map, an early map that someone drew, was a woman in a farmhouse. And she drew this map that was really pretty crappy. Like, it didn't really help very much with where I was going. But what she put on the map, she really paid so much attention to drawing the 5 doors on her farmhouse. And I was hiking down the hill with this map and thinking, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe people are going to draw these crappy maps, and and it really made me realize. And thinking through that, I thought, actually, no, this is something really interesting. The fact that she drew these doors on the farmhouse and this big chimney, because that's where they're making cheese, that was actually her telling me through the drawing what is important to her in her life. Because that is the center of her world, and that what I would have drawn on the map was a whole bunch of other different things, including better directions for one. But that actually going out and expecting people to draw the map I would have drawn was actually was wrong, and that actually what she'd done was show me the much more interesting path, which was that actually just letting people draw whatever they want really told me something about who they are and how they see the world and what is important to them. And I think that was something that I found really profound. And especially, I mean, walking through, if you look at voting in Switzerland, kind of 25% of Swiss people reliably vote for a pretty far right, pretty racist party. And if you look at the distribution of those votes, a lot of those people are people up in the mountains, farmers, as opposed to people living in big cities, as is everywhere. So all the people that I was meeting and that I was asking to draw maps, I don't think we had it very much in common politically at all. But I think as an opportunity to, I don't know, pay attention to how they see the world and connect to them on a kind of human way and get out of that idea that, oh, you guys are all racist farmers. And actually we can connect on a human way, and I can try and walk for a few hours using your map to find my way, I think was actually was something that I found really kind of beautiful in a way, and kind of important in terms of just zooming out from some of the polarization and the news stuff and actually just getting back to human connection. Of course, there's the other question: if I'd been a black guy doing this walk, would they have drawn maps for me? I don't know, but
right. Did you feel like you were craving that kind of connection, like going into this? I mean, I know this was a repeat from something you did a year ago, but I would imagine there was some personal desire just outside of the travel experience for that as well, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so, I mean, it was a repeat in the sense that I tried again, but the the first year, I only managed to walk one day before I broke my leg, so I didn't manage to get very far. I mean, it was certainly something I was craving, because I think in addition to reducing unexpected things, the other thing that technology does, I think, is just reduces the need for human connection when you're traveling. If you know where you are, you arrive at the airport, you order an Uber, you get to the hotel. I think both technology and money, and I think technology has come, and also as we get older, we get at least in my case, slightly richer, so I don't have to stay in the as crappier places as I used to stay in. And I think the combination of both those things reduces the amount of human connection that is required when you travel, because you can go on a whole trip almost and barely interact with anyone, because you just don't need to. You get in your Uber, you go to a fancy hotel, they check you in without any real interaction. You can find your way to whatever restaurant you want to go to. You don't need to talk to anyone. And I think I really miss that, because so many of my most precious memories of traveling are of those random interactions with people. I remember years and years ago, I was in Tehran, and I was trying to get to the university, and I had no idea where I was going. There were buses everywhere, and this old guy came up to me. He's like, "Oh, are you lost?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to go to the university." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll help you." And he got on the bus with me. He paid for my bus ticket, and then sat with me. It was kind of half an hour on the bus, and then we had to change buses. And he went to the next bus and said to the bus driver, "This guy's getting off at the university. Just make sure he gets off at the university." And this was kind of a whole, like half an hour of this guy's day. He paid for my bus ticket. And that was a totally magical experience that if I'd had Google Maps and Uber, I never would have had. And I think back to those kind of experiences so often, and with such nostalgia. And there's no reason why we can't go out and have them again. It's just we have to be intentional about it, I think. And traveling without a phone, as I did, is one way that you can do that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, your point on sort of like, I mean, you could almost imagine like a graph, like human connection goes down as technology goes up, But, it's interesting to hear about the first year and your story with the broken leg, which sounds horrible. And I don't think like anybody listening, whether they would come out of that and see it in a positive life really wants to go through that. That's like the ultimate fear when you don't bring your phone, right? You're like, well, what if something happens? And then something did happen. And of course, you survived it, but that's a real question, right? Like that's the thing that sort of prevents people from not bringing their phone. Like, what if something happens? What if something happens in my family? What if something happens to me, or I can't communicate? Yeah. I mean, how could people get over that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's real, and I think again to kind of caveat the fact that I mean, as a white middle class guy with a good passport, I think the list of bad things that can happen to me is obviously shorter than it is for plenty of other people. So I think there's a big caveat there that's really important to mention. But having said that, I think one, just thinking through like, okay, well, what is the worst thing that can happen is useful, because often the worst thing that can happen is actually kind of break your leg, and actually that can be okay. I think thinking through that is useful, because most of the time the worst thing is actually not that bad. But then I think something I really learned. So I alluded to was kind of traumatic thing this year. My best friend died in a climbing accident, and I've thought a lot about him this year and the lessons that I could take from his life. And he was someone who had this incredibly storied life. In Finland one day, he got stabbed in the heart. In Thailand, he got swept out to sea. He would have been a great guy for your podcast. Just he had so many mad things happen to him, and he survived all of them until he didn't. And one of the things I really learned from him, because he wasn't traumatized by any of these things. I think they sent a psychiatrist to his hospital in Finland, and he was like, "Well, what are you doing here? I'm fine." And I think what he taught me is that it's not the thing that happens that's traumatic, it's our reaction to it where the trauma lies. And I think if you can if you can pull those two things apart, and sometimes the thing is so awful that you're never going to get over it. And I don't think I'll ever get over his death, for example. But I think on lesser things, I think we can pull those things apart a little bit and say, okay, well, this thing that has happened that is true and real, and our reaction to it, and we have more control over our reaction to it. And I think that was a lesson that he taught me that I really brought to that situation of breaking my leg, where I say, well, my leg is broken, but I can control how I react to that, and I can choose to see this actually as overall a positive experience. That if I could go back in time, I would choose for that to happen again, because of what it taught me about my emotional and physical limits, and because nothing long-term bad happened. And I think that's for me, that was a really profound thing to learn, that you can pull apart the event and the reaction to it and see them as distinct things, and try to and have a little more control over how you react to things in a way that can transform potentially horrible and traumatic things into things that can, if not be positive, at least be neutral or learning or things that we can appreciate for what maybe they teach us about ourselves or about the world.
Yeah, so sorry for your loss.
Okay, I didn't think I was going to bring it up, but I mean, it seemed relevant to what we were talking about.
This is tied in with where you're at in life right now, and I think this is a good point of entry into your work, which I came into it through the article, but then going onto your website, which we'll link up to in the show notes, by the way, benbuckland.photo. In your about page, you talk about how your work's taken you over 100 countries, war zones, logging camps, some of the worst prisons on earth. And you talk about not shying away from the darkness to tell these compelling stories through your images. I'm like sort of quoting some of the things you said, in order to inspire hope and create positive action for change, what you said on the website. You're also a senior advisor on torture prevention. This was all like when I found out this stuff, I was like, wow, this is what a crazy, what an incredible background you have. There's so much to pick apart here. And I honestly didn't know what your demeanor would be like, having gone through and seen a lot of these things. And, maybe that's a place to start, like through your work and through your experiences, should we say the toll of exposing yourself to darkness in order to share a story. And when I say darkness, I could say, because it's a broad term, but I think we know some of the things that humanity is capable of, and you have borne witness to some terrible things, human rights issues, and you've been on the ground in these places. So maybe you want to share, to bring it to life, some of your on the ground experiences, and how did you end up in these places? Like, how did that?
Yeah. I mean, a lot to get into. I think so essentially, my career is a kind of jumble of things that I think are interesting or important. My friend Kelly called it a portfolio career recently, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds much better than just jumble. But essentially, I started with a career in human rights. So I've been working for, I guess, 15 years now in human rights, and specifically in torture prevention, which has led to me spending a lot of time in prisons and psychiatric hospitals and pretty horrible places. And I definitely get into some of those stories. But then on top of that, over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, I've built a kind of second career as a photographer and as a writer. And that's really been guided, I think, by that human rights experience, because I think where I can be useful and be a useful voice for as a photographer is not because I can take better images than anyone else, because I certainly can't, but that I have that background in human rights, and I can understand some of those stories and understand maybe how to tell them, how to approach really difficult stories, and then maybe how to tell them in a way that I think can help contribute to change. So I think even though they feel like very different things, I think, at least in my mind, they connect together really, really well. And just, I mean, you talked about the tall. I mean, there's a huge privilege again in being able to go into these horrific places and then walk out again. And I think, to me, that's the biggest lesson, is how lucky I am. I mean, I just to give one example, is that I was in I was coaching the national monitoring body in a West African country on how they can do better monitoring visits in prisons. So I went with them to a bunch of prisons. It's kind of key part of the job that I do, is helping them to get better at monitoring places. So how do you interview people in detention? How do you triangulate the information that you find to work out what's true and what's not? How do you turn that into change? And so I was with this national institution in West Africa, and we're in one of the, at least from a material conditions point of view, one of the worst prisons I've ever been in. It's a pretty small place built in colonial period, kind of the size of like a basketball court, with literally hundreds and hundreds of people in there, like 45 degrees outside, and so densely packed, like being in a mosh pit in a concert. Like, just, you can't even fit your way in there. And one of the so not enough space for people to lie down all at the same time. So people are sleeping or sitting down in shifts. People with a bit more money are able to have a place to sleep, and people with no support from outside pretty much never get to lie down or sleep a whole night. Because there's just not enough space. And there was a whole practice in the where I was, where people were often first detained not by the national authorities, but by people in villages, these kind of local militia groups, who would have a practice of tying people up with ropes that they put sand in. And so then they'd kind of rub these people raw. So people had this horrific kind of wounds on them, and just a horrible, horrible place. And I remember leaving that, and I coming back to, I'm privileged just being able to leave. Some of these people were in there for 20 years. And of course, because a lot of them in there for haven't even or in pretrial custody, so they haven't even seen a judge. So some of them probably innocent, many of them probably innocent. So, and so anyway, I have privilege of walking out, and I went to the airport, and there was a guy just going ballistic at the woman at the counter about some thing that was a problem with his seat. And I went up to him and I was like, dude, you just have no idea how lucky you are that that's your biggest problem. And I don't think he understood what I was talking about. But for me, that was just a really neat and time compressed example of just how much those kind of experiences can put the rest of our problems in stark contrast. And I think that's the kind of, at least that's how I've tried to see it in my own life. It's just, I mean, I get as annoyed as anyone about the fact that someone was really slow to make my coffee and totally petty and dumb things. But I think at least when I'm being the best version of myself, that it does enable me to zoom out a little bit and be like, yeah, really, this doesn't matter.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. Now, back to the show. The picture you painted there, I mean, you could just thinking about people still in there, like day to day for years. I don't even know how the human resilience is quite unbelievable. Well, I mean, this is a great example of, you're the senior advisor on torture prevention for the Association for the Prevention of Torture. This is the first time I was hearing about this organization through your work and just through preparing for this chat. I would love to hear a bit more about your work there. And, this is an example of just like these big problems that involve like cross-border systemic change. Like, can't say, how do you solve them? We're not going to solve the world's problems here, but like, what is the pathway for solving some of these bigger problems like torture, which is something like I don't think most people are thinking about on a daily basis yet? Since you've been to so many places, a lot more than the average person about what is some of these horrible things that are actually going on in the world. Sure, it's can be difficult to carry that with you on a day to day. I mean, it sounds like you've really found the gratitude and just like in your life and just kind of maybe, I don't know how you compartmentalize that or, but yeah, I know this is like a terrible multi-tiered question because, that's not what I'm supposed to do, but I think you get the gist of kind of.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the best kind of conversation when things go in lots of different directions. And I totally get what you're getting at. Maybe I try and get to part of it through just another example. And I'll try not to be too long-winded on it. But it's an example of a project that I've been involved in for years and years in Madagascar with the national police there. And I think it really underlines something that I think is really true about change in these kind of really complex situations. And I think two things. One, I think is the realization that bad things are mostly not done by bad people. But of course, there are terrible people. I've met some people who are legitimately psychopaths in prisons, and are ill in ways that make them, I think, enjoy doing terrible things. But I think the reality is that most people are trying to do their best in the situations in which they find themselves. And so I think change mostly happens through understanding what is the situation in which people are in, why do they do what they do, and finding areas where you can where your interests overlap. And I think just to make that really practical, so in Madagascar, I had this project with the police for a couple of years. And these are people who are, I mean, they're not lovers of human rights. I mean, I've had local cops there show me pictures on their phone of people that they shot that day. Like, these are not people who care that much about human rights. But we actually managed to advance a lot because essentially when I started working there, if you got arrested by the police in Madagascar, there's no standardized custody register. There's no document where in a standardized way they would write down, okay, we've arrested Jason. He's a foreigner, so did we call the embassy? Did he call his family? Did he see a lawyer? There was no standardized system for recording any of that. And those things are super important if you want people to not get tortured. And so we work with the police to develop this standard custody register that looks the same in all police stations, and that has a thing saying, well, we arrested you. Did they call their family? And all of these other things about time of arrest and all these other things that are useful. And so this has been implemented, not everywhere, but across a big chunk of the country, and has a really profound effect because now the police have to write down, did Jason call his family? If not, why not? And so they do it way more than they used to. And the police are into this, not because they give any about human rights, but because they see this as a way to be more professional and better police officers. And they're interested in that. They're like, oh, other cops do this in other countries, and this is the way they should do it. Oh, cool. Yeah, we want to do that. We want to be better. And so they're interested in it. And so our objectives align in that narrow space, and finding that space where the objectives align is this place where actually we can make enormous amount of progress. And I think that's what's interesting is in these complex environments, looking for those opportunities where actually you can find an alignment of interest and objectives with people with whom most of the time you have absolutely nothing in common and don't want the same things. And I think looking for those and then building on them is so interesting and so satisfying, and allows you, I think, sometimes, not always, and sometimes it just doesn't work, to make progress even in places where you think, okay, this is a disaster.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it's the idea of in that case you are identifying what would be motivating for them, and in which case was becoming, more like the cops on TV or whatever, the cops in other countries that like, oh, this is what professionals do. We want to become professional, not even thinking about sort of the human rights side of it. And of course that system is having the effect of preventing torture, as you mentioned, if you don't have these things in place. I mean, do you think that even if you like zoom out a little bit further and after this system's implemented, do you think this specific example of this system acts as almost like an awareness generator? Like, it's like, okay, I'm like, but through the act of like completing these forms and stuff, I'm actually like seeing this person more as human because we're talking about their family. We're talking about like, even though that's not the motivating intention, do you think it has that, like something like that has that effect?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's lots of kind of unexpected and spin-off effects of
Layers.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, layers to it. And I think what you'd hope is that if the people or the police are treating people more humanely, then the people are more likely to go and contact them if something bad has happened and share information with them, and that hopefully you get this rising tide kind of thing that improves. Of course, the situation is never like it's hard to get to perfection because access to a lawyer is obviously super important if you want people to have a fair trial and not be beaten up. But in a country where there's hardly any lawyers and the lawyers that exist are super expensive, that's a big problem that's kind of hard to fix. If you have a justice system that's based on confessions, then the police are going to be trying to get confessions. And if people are trying to get confessions, then they're going to, a lot of the time, they're going to beat someone up for them. And also, and there's big societal things. If there isn't good domestic violence legislation, or if there isn't then I've had cops say to me, but hang on, but I can hit my kids and I can hit my wife, but you're telling me I can't hit those criminals. And you're like, well, so there's like big kind of system level things that I think are sometimes really hard to change. And I think to work in this kind of space, I think you just have to focus on the little incremental changes and where you can make them, and just keep going while it's still possible to make those incremental changes, with the knowledge that that over time, hopefully you can make progress. But the bigger things sometimes are sometimes just overwhelming and difficult to change.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So like, yeah, your kind of daily motivation is like knowing these incremental changes add up to a lot, and you just do what you can, knowing that you're not ever going to be able to. Yeah. I can see, like, because you have to kind of, I would imagine with your role as a senior advisor on torture prevention, you have to kind of come to peace with the fact that, you're just solving the things in front of you that you can to the best of your ability, and knowing. But having seen these, this prison, for example, and these places, kind of like knowing these things are going on in the world, that's tough, man. It's
yeah. But I think it's also, and to kind of tie it back to the travel stuff and photography and stuff, I think in the end, another common thread in all of it is just about curiosity. And I think the more curious we can be about people, no matter who they are, then certainly the more interesting, so one, you can make progress on human rights things, but also the more interesting photos you can take of them, or the more interesting interactions you can have when you're traveling and you're on holiday. And I think curiosity for me is this common thread across all of these things, and making as a starting point, whatever you're doing, whether it's trying to work on torture prevention, or whether it's going on a holiday, or whether it's trying to tell a photographic story of something, having as a starting point, just asking really open questions of people about who they are and what's interesting to them and what's motivating them. I think that's a doorway to so much interesting stuff and so many good places that I always want to be going. And I think, if there's one thing that drives me in all the different bits of my fun part of my life, and then the work parts of my life, and hopefully that overlaps sometimes, it's that thing about curiosity. Because I think everyone is interesting. You just have to, maybe more or less so, but you just kind of have to dig a little bit to find it.
Yeah. Well, this is something that you excel at, I would imagine. This is like a core part of everything that you do. And I was watching one of your YouTube videos on trauma-informed photography. You can share what it's about, but basically it's like, working with people in these situations who have experienced trauma and like being able to sort of tell their story and connect with them. I'd love to hear more about that, because I think, and then maybe you can kind of share, going back to the curiosity thing, and like, okay, this may be like an extreme example of like, you're somebody who's a photographer who wants to like capture this person who's been through something, and you have to connect in a certain way where it's like taking into account their experiences and like being able to hold that kind of space and presence. Again, that might be like on the extreme end of the spectrum, but going back to the curiosity thing, perhaps after you speak to that, you can tie that in a bit more with like how we as travelers can, or just people walking through the world in your local neighborhood, like how can we better connect with, strangers and have those types of interactions that we value so much.
Yeah. I mean, lots again to unpack in that question. I think the trauma-informed photography approach that I have is one of those examples where it really comes out of the human rights work that I've done, because I do a lot of training with detention monitoring bodies, so people who are visiting prisons and police stations, psychiatric hospitals, and whatever, all the time, and so are doing interviews all the time with people in those places. And to do that effectively, you really do have to have this trauma-informed approach. And I realized actually that this is really something that applies absolutely to the way I want to approach photography as well. There's really kind of human-centered approach to photography, where you're not just coming in and taking a photo, but really you're trying to understand who someone is and what their story is and how they would want their story to be told. And I think a lot of the time consent in photography is kind of seen as this tick box thing, like, oh, I have a form, did you sign it? Yeah, no. And I think consent is so much richer and deeper, and actually, rather than being a process thing that you have to do, can actually be a doorway into understanding stories in a way that is way more interesting than maybe you imagined. Just to give you an example, I was in Kenya early this year, photographing this community Maasai community conservation project, and there's a bunch of Maasai women. At the time, there's 6 of them who were the first women in their communities to become rangers. So these really just powerful, cool women who had said, we want to be rangers, and had gone through the recruitment process and become rangers. They're awesome. And there was a kind of obvious story about them, an obvious visual story, which is them in their ranger uniforms out on the land with elephants around them and all the rest of it. And that story had actually been, I think, National Geographic and some others had been there and done some filming and had kind of shown that really, really well. And what I did, because it seems like the obvious thing to do, is I went and sat down with them. I didn't even bring my camera the first day. I just went and sat down with them and said, look, I think your story's super interesting. What photo should I be taking that would represent who you are? And one, at the end of the project, they were like, yeah, no one's ever asked us that before. And to me, that just seems like an obvious thing to do, because, and the upshot of it was that what they said, they were like, well, look, we're rangers, but we're also Maasai women. And so what we really love is to take you to our villages, and where we are milking goats and cooking for our families and playing that traditional Maasai female role, because that's still who we are. And that's really important to who we are. And I was like, yeah, bring it on. Let's do it. And so we went to their village, and to me, they're some of my favorite images from that assignment. And I never would have got there if I hadn't come to it with that question, because my assumption about what the interesting story was and the interesting visual thing was them walking around dressed in their uniforms, looking at elephants, which is part of it and is interesting. And I got some of those shots as well. But in the end, by being curious, I think I got to a much more interesting place. And I think that's to me where it becomes really interesting to come with this kind of curiosity and also this trauma-informed approach. I mean, they were not specifically traumatized, but that approach of curiosity and openness, I think, is so important from an ethical and consent point of view, but then is also just absolute gold from a storytelling point of view and from a human interest point of view, because you're just like, oh, wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I mean, that's just what a great question. And I mean, like you said, yeah, it sounds obvious, but if it was obvious, everybody would be doing it, right? Like the obvious thing in that way is like, just like you said, to capture them in the uniforms, like just kind of like, oh, we're going to like tell the story we want to tell. We're going to paint the picture that we see in our heads, which is always going to be like through the mindset of the person documenting, not the one being documented. Right.
Yeah, which in the end ties back to my walking around Switzerland thing. In the end, by following other people's maps, I was seeing the country that they thought was important rather than, because I could plan a great walk across the country. I can look on Instagram and see where the pretty things are and link them up in a path. But to me, that's way less interesting than some of the other ways you could do it that are driven by that kind of curiosity about how do other people see things.
How do you bring that curiosity to like an interaction, like when you're coming up and asking somebody to draw a map, or having this conversation, you first meet somebody?
I mean, I'm pretty shy, and I'm really I'm really scared that people are going to think that I'm bothering them. So I never talk to people I'm sitting next to on planes, and I think I don't want to be that guy who's like bothering someone. And so it really, I kind of have to force myself to do it, which is one of the reasons why doing this walking project was actually really good for me. I was forced to, otherwise I was totally lost. But so I think it's something that I want to get better at personally. But I think in the end, Ira Glass, the This American Life host, he, I think, one of the great interviewers of radio history, and he actually taught me something. Listening to him being interviewed about interviewing, that I think is really, that I actually use a lot when I'm thinking about how to approach someone to photograph them, or teaching how to interview people in a prison, or going up to someone when you're walking. And he's like, an interview, it's kind of like a dinner party, and the environment you create will be the environment of the party. And so if it's a transactional environment, if someone comes to dinner and you're like, oh, thanks for that wine you bought, and then don't talk to them again, they're going to be like, well, this sucked, I'm not coming back. But if they arrive and you say, hi, how are you doing? What do you need? What can I get you? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Here, take a seat. And thank you for this beautiful wine that you bought. Then that's a totally different environment. And I think thinking about that in terms of all these kind of interactions, I think the same approach really applies. That about, it's not that I want something from you, it's that we can have this kind of, we can have this interaction in a way that is meaningful for both of us. And actually, it was when I was doing my walk, one of the most beautiful things that anyone said to me was this two girls who, they were sitting on a mountain pass, and I'd stopped there too. It was a big hill to get up there, and I stopped there, and I kind of sheepishly was like, "Hi, I'm a weird guy. I'm doing this project," and explained it to them, and like, "Can you draw a map for me?" And they drew this totally ridiculous map. I think it's in the Times article. It's a picture of some cows. It's just like totally useless from a getting their point of view. Luckily, they gave me some oral directions that were actually pretty useful. But they had the most hilarious. Like, I was really, like always, I was kind of shy. Like, am I going to bother these people? But they laughed their heads off drawing that stupid map. And at the end, one of them said to me, like, you thought you were asking us for something, but you really gave us a gift. Because I think that was true of lots of the people, because I was giving people a pretty memorable experience. Because not every day does some weirdo come up to you and say, I'm walking across the country with no phone, can you draw a map for me? That's something that people are going to talk about later, because it's something they remember. And realizing that actually, if you can frame taking photos, doing this trip, all these kind of things as not a one-way transaction, then I think it's interesting. And I don't know if that's what you were asking, but that's the way I at least try and approach these kind of things.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, I think this is a theme this is a recurring theme on this show is when people have these sort of like whatever you want to call it, like a little mission or a quest or some kind of project like you were describing, or we had like fairly recently talked to somebody who, you know, she had a goal to read a book from every country in the world. There's like all these different ways you can explore, right? You know, when people are approached, they feel like, again, this is having like a project like this or like some kind of quest like this on any level isn't necessarily for everybody. But if you find yourself with some ideas, I would definitely encourage you to do it, even if it's just your own personal quest to like visit every coffee shop in, you know, the quarter of Paris or whatever it is. Like if you tell people about it, and like, you know, they are like the ones like in that coffee shop example, like they're people on the street. First of all, it's an excuse to kind of like go up to people because it gives you like sort of a thing. And then they're so excited to kind of like be a part of something. And generally I'd say and help you kind of like achieve something. I feel like they're getting something out of it because they feel like they're part of this greater mission. Like they were a piece, they were a cog in the wheel of like this greater mission. And I've experienced this myself through things I've done traveling. And it's just like, it's a cool thing. Like it's a cool exchange. So yeah, I just want to throw that out there because like maybe somebody's listening and they're like, if you haven't tried this before, it is a great conversation opener. It is a great way to kind of explore. And I'll leave that open because people can come up with their own versions of this, you know?
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think that's yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. And I would just add to it, like, and I'm glad you kind of brought up the coffee shop example or the reading a book example, because I think sometimes we think about adventure as being something that has to happen way out there, that we have to go to Antarctica or something to have an adventure, which I mean, would be cool. I'd like to go to Antarctica. But that we can have these kind of quests and these missions or adventures where we are now. And I mean, I grew up in Tasmania and I spent a lot of time, as I guess a lot of people who grew up in Tasmania in the 80s and 90s, thinking, oh, I can't wait to get out of this tiny little place. And then the next 20 years of my life thinking, oh man, it was amazing to grow up in Tasmania. what an incredible place. And I think sometimes we can think that adventure is far away when actually we can find it in our daily lives. And I'm working on I don't know if it will ever be able to be published because I'm not sure where it would fit. But I have a kind of summer project, and now it's autumn because I'm always way too optimistic about how long things will take. But I have a summer project in Geneva where I live at the moment, where I'm trying to find, interview, and photograph 24 different people, one at every single hour of the day and the night, who collectively kind of tell the story of the city. And I'm doing it not by, I didn't make a list of 24. I thought of the first people I photographed. I went to CERN, the big particle physics laboratory, in the middle of the night and photographed one of their laser laboratories. And then I asked them, I'm like, who else should I photograph that also tells a story? So it's also so that it's not just, because if I came up with a list, it would probably be like watchmaker, chocolate maker, cheesemaker, banker, which I mean, end up being on the list, but I really wanted it to be an organic thing where people would tell me what they saw. And so I've been going all around the city day and night, finding these people and meeting them at 4 o'clock in the morning or at 3 in the afternoon or whatever, and photographing them and talking to them about what they're doing, whether it's, I did meet a watchmaker, and all sorts of different people. And it's been such in the end, I don't, whether I can turn it into a magazine article or book or something is way less interesting to me than the fact that it's been such a fun adventure that I've been able to have within 20 minutes of my house. And I really like, coming back to your point about mission and quest, you don't have to go far to have adventures. You can have them wherever you are. You just have to kind of poke around a little bit and think of something and then go and do it.
That's such a cool project idea. You come up with great ideas, man. I got to say, that's so cool. Yeah, we have to see that one when it's done. I want to check that out.
Almost done. I've got 4 hours to go.
Nice. On the point of like, you're like Yeah, great Tasmania, great place to grow up. Living here in Switzerland now, like, what is your deal, Ben? Like, are you like a Swiss resident now? What brought you there? Are you hanging around? Like, what's going on in your life? How did you end up there?
Good question.
Usually I start with
Yeah,
those questions, but yeah,
I mean, it's definitely been a weird trajectory. So, I mean, like lots of, I mean, the Tasmanian economy has changed a lot in the last 20 years. There's an incredible art museum now. They're called the Museum of Old and New Art, that if you have an opportunity to go to, absolutely incredible. That's created a whole lot of culture jobs that never existed. But when I was growing up there, unless you really wanted to have a career in logging or fishing, there weren't a lot of great jobs to be had. There were some, of course, but not a ton. And so as soon as I was 18, I got a job at a fruit and vegetable shop, saved up a bunch of money, went to the UK for a year, I was a ski bum for a while in France, lived in Paris for a couple of years, working in a bar, trying to learn French. And then I did my first kind of big, again, it was without a phone by necessity. I traveled all the way back from Paris, all the way back to Tasmania, overland. I took one flight from Indonesia to Darwin, so in a kind of hour and a half flight because we couldn't find a boat. But the rest of the way just went by bus, train, boat, bike, and then went to university in Melbourne and was there for 5 years, and then wanted to do a master's, and so came to Switzerland, thinking that I would just come to Switzerland. They gave me a scholarship, which is why I ended up here. Thinking I would just come here for 2 years, do a master's, go back to Australia because I loved living in Melbourne. I was having a great time there. And then ended up staying. And last year I became Swiss. So I guess this is where I live now.
Congratulations.
Which, yeah, becoming Swiss is a whole other hilarious adventure. Like a kind of paperwork mission.
I became a Norwegian citizen a couple of years ago now.
Oh, wow. Where are you based in Norway?
In Oslo.
Cool.
Yeah, it was... they didn't allow dual citizenship for quite some time, but then as soon as they allowed it, I applied, and they foolishly let me stay. No, I'm kidding.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so that's it's nice to, it was always like a dream to have a dual citizenship for me, but yeah, living abroad, that's a whole other conversation. I'm going to encourage people to check out your work over at benbuckland.photo, which we'll link up to. Yeah, even just going through your portfolio, like you mentioned, this recent project, and then I found out about the suitcase project. That's another really cool, like that seems to be a theme in your work too, like this sort of, whether it's behind the scenes or openly, in this case, this idea of trying to follow this organic path, right? We didn't talk about that, but do you want to share a bit about that? Yeah, because I think there's some beautiful, beautiful stuff in there. Like I was reading one of the entries from Kabul.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, actually, from Zainab. Yeah, just talk about that project.
Yeah, I mean, that all came about because I think I had a realization that I think as with the best intentions, and I think trying pretty hard to do work in a way that I think is ethical and right, I think there are some stories that just I'm not the best person to tell, and that actually there's way more interesting places that you can get to if you can use the platform that I have or the connections that I have to let other people tell their own stories. And so I came up with this idea of the suitcase project I have an Afghan photographer friend, and he was one of the people stuffed into planes in the evacuation of Kabul. He'd done some work for a German news agency, so he managed to get on a list, went to Kabul airport, not thinking he would get on a plane, got stuffed into a plane, flew to Germany, and he'd left every single thing behind, like his cats, his cameras, his whole thing, because he'd gone to the airport not thinking that he would be one of the people who'd be evacuated. And so I did a little fundraising thing to buy him some new camera gear, and I went up to Germany to see him and give him this new camera equipment. And on the way there, I was thinking, how is this even close to enough? This is a guy who's just lost absolutely everything. How is giving him some new camera gear even close to enough? So I was thinking, well, maybe I can try and think of a kind of project that we could do together that would be meaningful. And so on the flight up there, I came up with this idea of suitcase project, which basically is an old suitcase I found at a flea market, and in it is a notebook and a 35 mil point and shoot film camera. And the idea is that this suitcase is now kind of gone all around the world, where I give it one by one to different people who've been displaced. Some are refugees, some are just migrants, some are undocumented. And they shoot a roll of film and then write in the diary about what home means to them. And what's interesting to me is that I remember one of the first people who I gave the suitcase to, this Ukrainian woman. If you go on the website, she drew some beautiful watercolors in the diary that I was just like blown away by. Then I developed a film, and I looked at her photos, and she'd been to like Portofino in Italy on holiday. And my first reaction was like, refugees shouldn't be on holiday in Portofino. Like, they should be suffering victims. Like, this project is going to suck. But then I realized, oh, actually, that's exactly why this project's interesting, because that's the story that she wanted to tell about who she is and about what her life actually looks like. That's not the story, the preconceptions that I have about refugees, which were, well, they should be suffering and missing their countries. Because that's a story I would have gone out and photographed. And the fact that she took photos of beautiful fishing boats in Portofino, I was like, oh, actually, that's way more interesting than whatever stereotype I would have come to, the project with. And so it's been really cool. It's still going. If any of your listeners know people who've been displaced who want to be part of it, I'm totally happy to ship them a suitcase. Because it's a kind of a slow burner. It's been going for a long time, and it takes, by virtue of the fact that it's totally analog, it takes a long time. But yeah, if any of your listeners know someone, then get in touch. I'm always looking for people to be part of it, because it's something I want to really continue over the long term.
Please take Ben up on that if you know somebody. Do you want to? What is the best way for people to get in touch? Just go to the website and contact.
Yeah, my email's on the website. ben@benbuckland.photo.
Great. Yeah.
Or I'm on Instagram @bensb. So either of those are
okay.
reliable ways to get in contact with me.
Yeah, we'll link up to that. I'm sure there's somebody listening that knows somebody who would maybe take a suitcase and be willing to tell that story or tell their story. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. I think you're a great guy, Ben, and I think you're doing amazing work that's really important in the world. And I know you probably won't say that for yourself because you don't seem like that type of guy. So I'm going to pump you up and say it for you. Thank you for your work on behalf of the Association for the Prevention of Torture as a senior advisor, all the things you guys are doing there with human rights and all the things you've done in the world, and to document some of these stories. Man, it's just, I'm kind of in awe, and I really appreciate your time. And I think I think you're just doing amazing stuff. So I want to say just thank you. And I hope we can stay in touch.
Yeah, me too. It's been really super fun chatting to you. And I mean, it's I think conversations where it's funny at the end, you said normally you start with where you're from and whatever. And I think it's a sign of a really good conversation where you actually don't need to go to those things, that you can actually just somehow organically go to some super interesting places. So yeah, thanks for taking us there. That was really fun to chat to you.
Thank you. That means a lot, especially somebody that's done so many interviews as you. I was like, yeah, I hadn't asked you about interview advice, but I think we got some along the way. So do you want to leave us with is there like a quote you're kind of got top of mind right now, or something that you're living by these days, or any words of wisdom or parting words? Maybe words of wisdom's too much pressure, but you know.
Yeah, I actually there is something that I saw the other day that I thought made a lot of sense to me. And this quote from Pliny the Younger. It's really on the reason I can find it is because I was just thinking about it just today, so I just pulled it up. It's in Latin. I won't try and say the Latin part, but the translation is, it says, "For this is not a digression from it, but the work itself." And I think about that a lot, this idea that the digressions and the sidetracks are often turn out to be the core of things, and often turn out to be the interesting things. And I think that's a way to think about both travel, like the unexpected and the diversions can be the most interesting stories. The unexpected, but also about life in general, that these side paths can actually take you to some of the most interesting places.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's like, you tied it all up, man. That's great. I love that. We'll leave you there. Thank you so much, Ben, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care and speak soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
There you go. Once again, thank you to Ben Buckland for stopping by the show. Check out his work, benbuckland.photo. Loved that conversation. Big theme, of course, the importance of curiosity. He talked about it in his human rights work and his photography and in his career. I mentioned at the top I was going to share a little phrase that Ben said that might be the key to unlocking a satisfying work life. And you might have heard it. He said, quote, "My career is a jumble of things that I think are interesting." That's it. And, if you want to put together a satisfying work life, I think it's a pretty good way to do it, right? You're just kind of following your curiosity. And, if you're interested in what you're doing at all times, again, it doesn't mean there aren't boring aspects of a job, but if you're generally finding your work interesting and you're curious about it, that's a pretty good life. I've been fortunate that I have found ways to just keep following my curiosity in my work, in my life, and in my travels. And it's, I don't know, I feel fortunate. It's worked for me. I just thought I would pull out that phrase in case anybody here listening is a little stuck. Could it be as simple as just following something that you find interesting? The world's not that simple, but I find that these simple ideas can really have a lot of powerful meaning underneath them and can help propel us forward. Certainly, curiosity has been a driving force in this podcast and my work and my travels. So anyway, just thought I'd share those things. And I am going to leave you with a quote now. And why not make it a quote about curiosity? Before I forget, sign up for our newsletter if you haven't done so. It's free. zerototravel.com/newsletter. You can remember that one. Okay, this one's from E.E. Cummings, who said, "Once we believe in ourselves, we can risk curiosity, wonder, spontaneous delight, or any experience that reveals the human spirit." Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers, my friend.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.